Ladies and gentlemen, today we are going to shatter the biggest myth society has sold us, that success only comes with a college degree. What if I told you that some of the wealthiest, most influential people on this planet were once college dropouts? From Steve Jobs to Oprah Winfrey, Mark Zuckerberg to Jay-Z, their stories prove one undeniable truth: your hustle, not your diploma, writes your destiny. This isn't about glorifying dropping out. It's about recognizing that when passion meets relentless effort, no classroom can contain your potential. So if you've ever been told you need a degree to make it, buckle up. By the end of this talk, you'll see why the greatest success stories often start with a leap of faith, not a graduation cap. Let's start by dismantling one of the most deeply ingrained assumptions in modern society, the idea that formal education is the singular path to success. Now, don't misunderstand me, education is invaluable. It sharpens the mind, exposes us to new ideas, and builds discipline. But here's the critical distinction. Education is not the same as schooling. Some of the most brilliant minds in history were voracious learners, but they didn't confine their education to lecture halls. They sought knowledge relentlessly, often outside the system, because they understood that real mastery comes from application, not just accreditation. Take Steve Jobs, for example. He dropped out of Reed College, but he didn't stop learning. He audited calligraphy classes, which later influenced Apple's revolutionary typography. Or consider Richard Branson, who struggled with dyslexia and left school at 16, yet built a billion-dollar empire by trusting his instincts and teaching himself through experience. These individuals didn't reject learning, they rejected the arbitrary notion that learning must happen within rigid institutional boundaries. Psychologically, this speaks to something profound: the difference between extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. The traditional path, college, degree, stable job, works for many because it provides external validation, a diploma, a title, societal approval. But the outliers, the ones who change industries or build empires, are often driven by something deeper. They're not chasing a gold star, they're obsessed with solving a problem, creating something meaningful, or proving something themselves. That internal drive is what allows them to weather failure, endure uncertainty, and persist where others quit. Philosophically, this forces us to ask, what is education truly for? Is it about compliance, jumping through hoops to earn a credential? Or is it about competence, developing the skills and wisdom to navigate the world effectively? The most successful dropouts understood this distinction. They didn't abandon learning, they took ownership of it. They read voraciously, sought mentors, failed forward, and treated every experience as a lesson. So ask yourself, are you waiting for permission to succeed, or are you taking responsibility for your own education? Because the world doesn't pay you for what you know. It pays you for what you do with what you know. And that's a lesson no degree can teach you now. Let's confront a brutal but liberating truth. The world doesn't care about your potential, it cares about what you deliver. And that's where the myth of the overnight success collapses. When you study the trajectories of those who dropped out and rose to the top, you find a common thread and almost inhuman capacity for work. This isn't about luck or talent alone. It's about the willingness to outwork everyone else in the room while maintaining the clarity of mind to work smarter, too. Take Elon Musk, for instance. After dropping out of Stanford's PhD program, he didn't coast on intelligence alone. He lived in his first office, showered at the YMCA, and worked 100-hour weeks to Zippity, then PayPal, then SpaceX and Tesla, often to the point of physical collapse. Why? Because he understood a fundamental psychological principle: mastery isn't gifted. It's seized through repetition, failure, and obsessive refinement. The 10,000-hour rule isn't just a cliche, it's neurological reality. Skill is myelin wrapped around neural pathways through relentless practice, and no elite performer, entrepreneur, or innovator bypasses that law. But here's what's rarely said: this kind of hustle isn't just about hours logged. It's about tolerating discomfort, psychological, emotional, even physical, that would make most people quit. Psychologists call this grit, but that undersells it. It's more than perseverance, it's the ability to stare into the abyss of uncertainty, self-doubt, and exhaustion and still choose to move forward. The dropout turned millionaire isn't just hardworking, they've conditioned themselves to thrive in environments where others would suffocate. Philosophically, this exposes a societal lie that work-life balance is always sacred. The reality, every transformative breakthrough in history came from someone who, for a time, sacrificed balance for singular focus. That doesn't mean burnout is virtuous. It means priorities demand ruthless honesty. If you want extraordinary results, you must accept an extraordinary workload, at least for a season. So ask yourself, are you willing to pay the price? Not just in effort, but in missed parties, sleepless nights, and the loneliness of the climb. Because the door to exceptional success isn't labeled talent or luck, it's labeled relentless effort, and it's open to anyone with the courage to walk through. Consider this paradox. The most successful people are not those who avoid failure, but those who have learned how to use it as fuel. This is where the dropout mentality diverges sharply from conventional wisdom. While society teaches us to fear mistakes, to see them as marks of shame, the individuals who achieve extraordinary success develop an almost alchemical ability to transform failure into advantage. The psychological mechanism at work here is profound. Most people experience failure as a threat to their identity. When they stumble, they interpret it as evidence of inadequacy, triggering shame and retreat. But the dropout turned visionary, they reframe failure as data. Every setback becomes a diagnostic way to identify weaknesses, test assumptions, and refine strategy. Take James Dyson, for example. He endured 126 failed prototypes over 15 years before perfecting his vacuum technology. That's not persistence, that's a complete redefinition of what failure means. Neurologically, this aligns with what we know about neuroplasticity. Each time you push through discomfort and learn from mistakes, you're literally rewiring your brain to handle adversity more effectively. But there's a deeper philosophical layer here as well. Ancient Stoic philosophers understood this when they spoke of the obstacle being the way. What appears as a barrier isn't just something to overcome. It's the very path to growth itself. Modern psychology confirms this with the concept of post-traumatic growth. While most research focuses on major life crises, the principle applies equally to professional setbacks. Those who learn to metabolize failure don't just recover, they emerge stronger, wiser, and more capable than before. This explains why so many successful dropouts have multiple bankruptcies or collapsed ventures in their past. They weren't defeated, they were being conditioned. So the critical question isn't whether you'll fail, you will. The question is, what relationship will you have with your failures? Will they be tombstones marking the death of your ambitions? Or will they be stepping stones, each one lifting you higher than the last? Because in the end, your capacity for success isn't determined by how you celebrate victories, but by how you negotiate defeats. Let's examine one of the most radical psychological shifts separating conventional thinkers from those who achieve extraordinary success: the willingness to pursue a vision even when no one else understands it. This is where most people falter, not from lack of capability, but from an ability to withstand the psychological weight of others, skepticism. The dropout turned visionary faces something far more challenging than financial instability or technical hurdles. They face the loneliness of believing in something that doesn't yet exist in anyone else's imagination. Consider Howard Schultz's early struggles to convince investors that Americans would pay $4 for coffee, or Reed Hastings' battle to persuade Blockbuster that streaming would replace DVDs. These weren't just business challenges, they were psychological crucibles. Every innovator faces what psychologist Rollo May called creative courage, the ability to tolerate the anxiety of nonconformity long enough to bring something new into being. Neurologically, this conflict plays out in our brain's threat detection systems. Social rejection activates the same neural pathways as physical pain and evolutionary adaptation that once kept us safe in tribal environments. But here's the paradox: breakthrough success often requires temporarily overriding those very instincts. The individuals who change industries or create new markets aren't sociopaths ignoring all feedback. They've developed the discernment to separate valid criticism from the brain's primal fear of exclusion. Philosophically, this touches on Kierkegaard's concept of the crowd as untruth. There's profound wisdom in recognizing that consensus isn't truth, it's just consensus. The most transformative ideas in science, art, and business were initially rejected because they didn't fit existing paradigms. This isn't about rebelliousness for its own sake, but about developing the intellectual rigor to distinguish between what's popular and what's right. So ask yourself, where in your life are you waiting for permission that will never come? What idea have you muted because you feared being misunderstood? Remember, validation follows value creation, not the other way around. The world doesn't applaud visions, it applauds realized visions. Your job isn't to convince skeptics prematurely, it's to build so compellingly that their skepticism becomes irrelevant. Let's dissect one of the most potent yet misunderstood advantages in the dropout to millionaire trajectory, the underdog mindset. This isn't about victimhood or disadvantage. It's about the psychological alchemy that occurs when someone has nothing left to lose and everything to prove. The system labels them unqualified, but this very exclusion becomes their greatest strategic asset. Stripped of conventional credentials, they develop something far more valuable. A relentless creativity that thrives on constraints and a hunger that institutionalized thinkers often lack. Neuropsychologically, this phenomenon maps to what's called adversarial growth. When the brain can't rely on traditional pathways to success, it rewires itself to find unconventional solutions. Look at Sarah Blakely, who turned fathers and dollars and a radical idea about women's undergarments into Spanx, a billion-dollar company launched without a business degree, fashion experience, or industry connections. Her lack of traditional qualifications forced her to see opportunities insiders were blind to. This is the paradox: sometimes knowing less means seeing more. Philosophically, this echoes Nietzsche's concept of will to power, not in the crude sense of domination, but as the fundamental human drive to overcome limitations. The dropout entrepreneur embodies this literally. Their entire existence becomes a testament to the principle that perceived weaknesses can be transformed into strengths. There's a reason so many dyslexic entrepreneurs excel in big picture thinking. Their brains adapted to compensate, developing extraordinary pattern recognition that normal education might have suppressed. But here's what's most crucial: this underdog advantage isn't automatic. It requires conscious reframing. Every obstacle must be viewed through what psychologist Carol Dweck calls a growth lens, not as evidence of limitation, but as raw material for innovation. The moment you start seeing your unconventional background as an asset rather than an apology, you unlock what the credentialed masses can't replicate. So I challenge you, where in your life are you letting perceived disadvantages define you? What if your very own qualifications contain the seeds of your unique contribution? Because in an era of homogenized education and cookie-cutter career paths, the market doesn't reward conformity. It rewards those bold enough to leverage their distinctiveness. Let me reveal the final and perhaps most practical insight from studying these unconventional success stories. while their paths diverged wildly, every dropout turned millionaire left behind a clear trail of breadcrumbs, specific psychological and behavioral patterns that anyone can study and adapt. This isn't about mimicking their actions superficially, but understanding the underlying principles that made their success inevitable once certain thresholds were crossed. The first principle: they all became relentless students of their craft, treating every interaction as a potential lesson. Consider how Jay-Z went from street entrepreneur to business magnate. He didn't just make music, he dissected the music industry's financial architecture until he could rebuild it to his advantage. What's psychologically revealing is how these individuals approach learning differently. While formal education often promotes passive absorption, these self-made visionaries practiced what cognitive scientists call deliberate learning, the intentional, often uncomfortable process of targeting weaknesses and seeking challenges at the edge of their competence. They didn't just network, they identified exactly who possessed knowledge they lacked and systematically acquired it. This explains why so many dropouts become autodidacts of extraordinary caliber. They develop what psychologist Anders Ericsson termed mental representations in their fields that surpass those of conventionally trained peers. Philosophically, this exposes a profound truth about human potential. We rise or fall to the level of our self-education. The ancient Greeks understood this. Socrates didn't lecture, he questioned. Aristotle didn't just teach, he cultivated wonder. Modern society has inverted this, prioritizing credentials over curiosity. But the dropout success stories reverse it again, proving that when you combine obsessive curiosity with strategic application, you create what physicist David Deutsch calls reach, the ability to extend your grasp beyond your current limitations. The actionable insight here isn't complicated. Conduct a ruthless audit of your daily inputs. Are you consuming what everyone else consumes? Thinking what everyone else thinks? The patterns are there for those willing to see them. Success leaves clues in the books read, the questions asked, the mentors sought, and most importantly, in the consistent application of knowledge until it becomes wisdom. So I leave you with this challenge: stop waiting for permission to become who you're capable of being. These unconventional success stories aren't exceptions. They're proof of what's possible when human potential meets relentless execution. The question isn't whether you can do the same. It's whether you're willing to pay the price they paid and think as they thought. Because in the end, the only real credential that matters is your ability to create value where others see none. Ladies and gentlemen, what these extraordinary stories reveal is far more profound than simply college dropouts who made it big. They expose a fundamental truth about human potential. Success is not about the path you take, but about the mindset you cultivate along the way. These visionaries didn't succeed despite dropping out. They succeeded because they developed an unwavering commitment to self-education, an almost superhuman tolerance for discomfort, and the courage to pursue visions others couldn't yet see. The diploma they rejected wasn't replaced with nothing. It was replaced with something far more valuable: an insatiable curiosity, relentless work ethic, and the psychological resilience to transform every failure into fuel. So as you leave here today, ask yourself this: will you wait for the world's permission to pursue your potential, or will you follow the trail these pioneers have blazed, where the only credential that matters is your ability to create value, and the only validation you need comes from bringing your boldest ideas to life? The choice is yours, but remember, the world changes not by those who follow the rules, but by those bold enough to rewrite them.